Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our roundtable today. My name is Tiffany Kane, and I would like to thank you for joining us for the Teacher Candidates Compensation Shifting Perspectives. I'll begin by acknowledging our native land acknowledgement. All meetings we begin by acknowledging we meet on the traditional lands served by the indigenous people. We honor America's first people and elders, past, present, and emerging. And more specifically, I'm joining you from my telework space in Washington, D.C., which sits on the ancestral lands of the Nukchuk and Anacostan people. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations.
So good afternoon. I thought you were finished, Tiffany.
I am. I was about to say, and Andrea Prejean, our director, will take over from here.
Thanks, Tiffany. My name is Andrea Prejean. I'm the director of the NEA Teacher Quality Department. The NEA Teacher Quality Department supports teachers throughout their careers as they engage with students, with their colleagues, and with the families of those students. We know that all students deserve quality teachers who engage with their schools and communities, and the NEA provides programs and opportunities that assist teachers throughout their professional journey. The TQ department includes the NEA Aspiring Ed program and supports teacher candidates and others who have expressed an interest in becoming a classroom teacher. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon for this really important topic, and a topic that we see being discussed more and more, and we have some experts and folks engaged in the work to help guide us today in the conversation. We've certainly seen a shift in perspectives on compensating student teachers, and we know that states across the country are struggling to address school staffing shortages at a time when the number of individuals pursuing degrees in education is shrinking. Most of us know that that is an issue that happened before the pandemic, but we certainly see that it is exacerbated by the pandemic and the current situation. Compensation and working conditions have plagued teacher recruitment for years. Long considered an issue for urban and rural school districts, most districts are now struggling with shortages fueled by the pandemic and the public perception of the profession. This has resulted in states looking at new ways to entice individuals into the profession. While student teachers have long been considered a professional asset to learning environments, has the time come to move student teaching from an unpaid internship? Might the inability to work during student teaching negatively impact recruitment efforts among our most diverse populations? And is it realistic to ask student teachers to take out student loans for their living expenses because they must quit their jobs at the direction of some of their institutions while they are student teaching? Joining us today from New America is Melissa Tooley. She's one of the leading experts in educator quality and will facilitate today's session. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Excuse me. And thank you to the NEA for inviting me to facilitate this conversation today. I'm excited to get started, so I won't talk too much before we jump in. But as Andrea said, I'm Melissa Tooley. I direct New America's education policy programs work on educator quality issues. And I am excited to be talking today about shifting perspectives on student teaching. First, want to just level set on a few things. So we're using this phrase student teaching to mean, I think all of us here know, but just to make sure, to mean that period of time when a prospective teacher is working alongside a current teacher before they are employed in order to receive some on-the-job training. And so that typically is maybe the last 3 or 4 months in a traditional teacher preparation program, although there have been some new student teaching models that have been gaining traction, like residencies that are a full year working alongside a mentor teacher. And so we can talk more about those when we jump in. And there's increasing recognition, I would say, not just in the teaching profession, but in many professions, that unpaid internships really limit who can access them. And so that's something I'd also love to dig into today. And we've seen some states starting to make some policy shifts. So we'll talk to Beth from Tennessee about some of their efforts. And recently there's been a bill in Colorado that would provide stipends to student teachers that have financial needs. So starting in 2023, they would receive $11,000 for a 16-week residency and $22,000 for a 32-week residency. So there's definitely some changes afoot, and we'd love to jump in to start discussing those now. And in addition to hearing from the panelists, we'd love to hear from all of the attendees. So along the way, you'll see some questions dropped in the chat that we would really appreciate your engagement in, because we want to understand your perspectives as well. So with no further ado, I'm thrilled to be joined by 4 fantastic panelists. I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves and to, as part of that, share why compensating teacher candidates is such a hot topic right now. Why is this something that's become top of mind, even though we've essentially had these types of unpaid student teaching experiences in place for nearly a century? Let's start with Brittany.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brittany Peralt. I am an aspiring educator, or as I can say, I'm finally an educator. I finished my student teaching last Thursday, actually, and I will be approved for my certification in the coming weeks. So very exciting. Student teaching has been my life for the past year. I'm from the state of Michigan. I attended Michigan State University. And as you can tell, I am actually in a school. I am in a spare classroom right now. I'm living the life, as a lot of you have.
Hold on. I'm sorry. I got 2 things.
Thank you. So as you can tell, as a student teacher, it's very hard to work full time in this job and take classes and try to find ways to support yourself financially, as well as emotionally. This job is draining, as we all know, as an educator, but the level of commitment it takes just to be a student teacher is so different as well. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all about it today, but student teaching hits close to my heart. I just lived through it. But I'm excited to share my experiences with you all today.
Wonderful, thank you. Beth, can we hear from you next?
Sure. Good afternoon. I am Beth Brown. I'm a high school English teacher by trade, currently on leave to serve as the president of the Tennessee Education Association, and am ending my 4-year tenure as the TA president. I'm really excited to be in this space to talk about this particular issue. Tennessee has done some really interesting things in the last couple of years as we are recognizing that the educator shortage crisis that we're facing, it's been building for a couple of decades, but we have really hit a critical stage, and the shortages have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so as we're looking at ways to fill the vacant positions that are becoming increasingly more difficult to fill, we also are really interested in making sure that we are diversifying the educator pipeline, that we are recruiting and retaining educators who reflect the diversity of our student population. And so as we're talking about apprenticeships and the student teaching experience, we have to be really deliberate about removing barriers into the profession. And so that's going to be part of the conversation today. And again, very happy to be in this space with you.
Wonderful, thank you again for joining us. Jennifer, can I have you introduce yourself next, please?
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to be a part of this wonderful panel. This is really a topic that's so important to all of us. And I'll just introduce myself. First of all, I'm Jennifer Robinson, currently professor of teaching and learning and executive director of the Center of Pedagogy at Montclair State University. And the Center of Pedagogy brings together faculty from the arts and sciences, education, and the schools in a cohesive group to prepare teachers for New Jersey and beyond. That's where Montclair State is. I began my career as a special education teacher in Chicago public schools, and then helped start a school in a small suburb of Chicago. While I was in graduate school, I became assistant director of childhood education program at Teachers College, Columbia University, working with professional development schools. And so my heart is very, very near the schools. And the work that I do is really based on pre-service and working with experienced teachers. And since coming to Montclair State, I was able to establish a unit within the Center of Pedagogy to recruit in teachers of color and reinforce, I would say, the university's commitment to this charge and support several initiatives to diversify our teacher candidate population. And I would just add to what was already said about why this topic is so important right now is that many teachers are first generation college going. They have to work as well as study at the same time. And so when it comes to getting to that student teaching semester, especially those who are not only working so that they can pay their car insurance or to make sure that they can get to and from their student teaching placement, they also sometimes have to contribute to their families. And so with the cost of living going up, we've seen an incredible pandemic of the economy, actually, as well. I think that this topic is really, really important to talk about, and that's why I think it's important that student teachers and those who are apprenticing to become teachers need to be compensated during that time when they're learning to teach.
Those are such important points. Thank you for bringing those up, and I am excited to delve into those more deeply with you in just a little bit. First, we're going to have Jim, last but not least, introduce himself and tell us more about why he thinks this has become such a hot topic.
Good day, everyone. I'm Jim Meadows. I'm staff with the Washington Education Association, which is the NEA affiliate in Washington State, and really glad to be invited to this conversation. I am a certificated Washington educator. Still, I've been on staff with WA for around 20 years now, and the bulk of my work has really been around educator quality, certification, system support, and elevating members to really lead in the transformation of the profession. So great conversation today, and thank you, NEA, for hosting this. So, clearly the world around us is just changing so quickly. And, we know there's a mounting decline in enrollment in teacher preparation programs. And even with greater attention to diversity and diversification of the workforce, we're still not seeing changes in the outcomes. We're actually seeing declines in diverse candidates going into programs, which is a massive system issue. Omicron really tested the stability of school staffing in new and just extremely concerning ways. And it's important for all of us to look back to January and February, where we all were at that point in time, and really wrestle with forward-thinking policy solutions that keep us from reliving that period of time again. As context, in Washington State, we have roughly 65,000 certificated teachers. We currently have over 14,000 emergency substitute teachers. This type of certificate is really the last option that exists for staffing a classroom with an adult. We know human resources patterns are also morphing to increasingly be competitive in this environment. Hiring is happening earlier. Some districts are offering signing bonuses. I really think there's an opportunity for us to take a career continuum mindset with this policy problem. So why wouldn't we focus on changes to the teacher preparation space that might help address all of the system issues? And just, one last point is, I think there's a greater recognition throughout our system, which is, I think, in part why we're having this conversation, and in part why Brittany has stepped into that space of leadership in aspiring educators, is we're recognizing there's just this vulnerability among pre-service educators on that career continuum. I've lived it, I remember it, it's part of our structure, but how can we make sure the experience of our aspiring educators is more embracing and supportive?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jim. So I'm going to ask each of you some questions so you can give us a little bit more specificity about your specific work intersecting with the issue of compensation for student teachers. But I really do want this to be a conversation. So as we're going, please feel free to jump in, add things. Really want it to feel like we're sitting around having coffee, not on Zoom. So Brittany, I'd love to start with you. As you discussed, you've just been through this experience personally. And as part of the NEA, you actually brought a proposal to the 2021 Annual Representative Assembly, where you were proposing something around compensating student teaching. Can you talk a little bit about that proposal, what it was, what motivated you to do that, and what it resulted in? I won't give the spoiler.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I apologize, the lights may go out above me or behind me. It's the motion sensor, so I apologize in advance for that. But I did propose an NBI at the NEA-RA this past summer. So that was right before my student teaching experience began, and it was weighing very heavily on me as to what I was going to do when I started student teaching. My university tells me that I am not allowed or not encouraged to work while I student teach. And so when you're working full time, it's hard to find time to take classes and to teach and to have another job. And so a group of aspiring ed leaders sat down on Zoom, and we were talking about our experiences and what we believed what we could do in a way to really start the conversation as to how to support student teachers, because that is a big bulk of our aspiring ed membership for NEA. And so we started talking about all of the different ways that we do not feel supported. And that first step was, we're doing all of this work, and we are an asset to the districts that we're in and the school environment, and yet we're the ones paying to do this experience, right? And so instead of having money come into us as teachers and as professionals that we're supposed to be, we're paying thousands of dollars to do this. And so we sat down and we talked about all the expenses that we had. And so we decided that our request to NEA through this NBI would be to have NEA, the NEA president, Becky Pringle, write a letter to the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, and kind of lay out, the frustrations of aspiring educators, and give more background information as to what we were asking, which is a stipend, some kind of compensation to our student teachers who are out in the field every day. And so that letter was written. It's very exciting. Though we have not seen much action around that. And I know it takes a lot of time for that to happen, but that letter was written, and it's the first step in creating bigger waves and a bigger conversation around this.
Yeah, and in terms of, you talked about spending thousands of dollars, so you were actually paying tuition and fees to your university in order, while you were doing the student teaching, you're basically compensating them for the support they're providing to you during that time. Is that right?
Yes.
Just to confirm that.
So in my university, so my student teaching is a full year. I attend Michigan State University, and so our program requires that you student teach for an entire school year. As a special education major, I have two different placements, a gen ed and then a special education placement. My colleagues who are secondary education and just elementary general ed, their placements are also 1 year as well. But my tuition, I would say, comes out to roughly $10,000 a semester, and that does not include my housing or my transportation. That's strictly tuition. So yes, I am paying a lot of money to work for free.
How are you covering those living expenses? Are you taking out student loans?
Yep. So I did take out student loans. That was about the only thing I could do. Thankfully, I was able to live at home with my parents, though that was not my first choice. I would love to be an adult and go out and live on my own, but that is not the case, and that's not something that's doable right now. So I'm living at home, and I'm very thankful for that. But a lot of my colleagues do not have that access to their home. People who live out of state, who come to Michigan, who want to be certified in Michigan, don't have the luxury of living at home and student teaching close to their home.
Absolutely. And do you know of anyone, or have you seen the unpaid aspect of student teaching be a barrier where somebody who wanted to perhaps pursue teaching didn't because they weren't sure how they would be able to afford it?
For sure. I have colleagues who, so in my program, we graduate after 4 years, and then our student teaching year is the year after we graduate. So we already have a bachelor's, we just do not have a certification. And so I have colleagues who graduated with me last May who chose a different route to certification because it was cheaper, or they transferred to another university because they could earn a master's degree while they student taught. So they were still getting something. So while I student teach and I take classes and I have tuition and I earn master's credits, I will not earn a master's. I will only earn credits to then be applied to a program potentially. So I have colleagues who leave the profession or who will leave their teacher prep program early because they realize I cannot afford to go work for free and then have to cover my housing and all of these things on top of it. I have a friend who flat out told me, this week I have to choose between gas to get to my placement and dinner. What kind of situation are we putting the future of the profession in? It's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, that example I'm sure resonates with everyone here. In terms of, have you heard of other campuses in Michigan where student teachers are compensated? Is your experience the norm? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there are programs at other universities and colleges around the state of Michigan, like a residency program where student teachers are being paid in a way where it's, well, here's your student teaching experience. And if you go in and if you're a substitute for so many days a week, then we'll give you something. Then you can be compensated. But those programs are very limited to the number of applicants. They're in very few places, so you don't have a wide range of locations. Plus, you have to make a commitment to that district for so many years to stay. So while you're getting some type of compensation as a substitute, you're losing out on valuable experience with a mentor teacher, as well as not having the normal student teaching experience and having to make a commitment to a district. So there's two sides to that, but in some way there is some compensation at some point, but it's not the same.
It's really helpful. Thank you. And do you have any suggestions for how Michigan legislators or legislators in other states could make it possible for student teachers to receive some compensation? Are there ideas that you've brought forth as in your role as an aspiring educator?
I've had it's been a privilege to have talked to the governor, to talk to state legislators about this specific issue. And actually, the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, has included it in a recent budget proposal, talking about how we can provide a stipend for student teachers. And while right now, when I look at our current legislature, is that something that would pass right now? Maybe not. That's the political side of it. But I hope that at some point, and I hate to say that the teacher shortage gets worse, but I at some point I hope that as a society we look and say, if we don't have enough teachers, we can't keep our buildings open. How do we attract more people to the profession? How do we get people to go through teacher prep programs so that they're highly qualified for these roles with our students? And so I would say my advice, but I'd love to just encourage Michigan legislators to step inside a classroom and see the work that goes into being a teacher or a student teacher. Place yourself in someone else's shoes and then somehow find some funds. I know we have emergency funds somewhere, or I'm not going to pretend that I know everything about government, but there's got to be something we can do. Every little bit helps. Providing any kind of resource will help a student teacher for sure.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Oh, again, just really, I think, resonated with everyone. Thank you for sharing your experience. I also think it's a great lead in. You sort of brought up residencies as one option that allows student teachers to be compensated while they're training and learning in the field, in schools. I would love to turn to Beth Brown now and have her share her experiences in Tennessee, and specifically how Tennessee has been focused on addressing some of the teacher shortages that have existed there. I know there's a program in Clarksville specifically that has got a lot of attention recently, in part because it spurred some efforts for the state to apply to the U.S. Department of Labor for a new apprenticeship program for teachers. Could you give us some background about what that is, what that program is, what sort of spurred that movement, and then tell us a little bit about your personal involvement and why the union became involved in this work?
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. So a few years ago, the Clarksville-Montgomery County School District launched a Grow Your Own initiative. They were partnering with Austin Peay State University. For those who don't know where Clarksville is, it's right up on the Kentucky border. It is a military base town with a pretty diverse student population. And one of the things that the school district realized is that their educator diversity was not reflective of the student diversity, and that was a concern. So they were trying to think about how to address that issue, as well as the issue of attracting people into the profession. And so they started this Grow Your Own initiative locally, this residency, through a partnership with Austin Peay State University, where they were targeting high school students who might be interested in the profession as part of a residency, and also education support professionals. Because we know that education support professionals are firmly entrenched in our communities. They are, really, really bought in. These are their places. And so they were targeting education support professionals and thinking about how can we remove barriers to entering the profession for folks who've already demonstrated a love for our Clarksville public schools and our public school students. That program started seeing some success and caught the attention not only of the state of Tennessee, but states around the nation. And so the Tennessee Department of Education launched an endeavor that was quite similar. They used CARES Act dollars as well as ESSER dollars to expand that to, I want to say 63 or 65-ish programs across the state. Again, started seeing some real interest, particularly in the partnership between local school districts and education preparation providers, or EPPs. And that culminated in the application to the U.S. Department of Labor for an apprenticeship program, so making teaching an apprenticeable profession. I'm going to be very, very transparent. The Tennessee Department of Education did not initially come to the TEA saying we would love your support on this. Their application got kicked back a couple of times, and finally the USDOL said, it would be really great if you would get TEA and NEA to sign on. And so they had to reach out to us and get our support. And when they initially reached out, I was a little alarmed, I think, as most people in our state were when they first started hearing about this program, because they didn't want it to be another Teach for America program or some other program that circumvents educator preparation. We did not want to dilute or diminish the professionalism of educators who have experienced training. And so that was a concern that we raised in our very first conversation with the department. Got some, after we reviewed the application, we understood what was being asked. We did go to NEA. They also had the same concerns. But again, once we reviewed it and realized that this was not a program designed to circumvent training, it's actually intended to provide high quality job embedded training for aspiring educators or prospective educators in a way that's going to allow them to be compensated for the work that they're doing. And this is an important piece, allow them to graduate without debt. So those were two really, really important pieces. And they were, I had to really point that out to the TEA board of directors to get them to vote to sign on to this application. Some other pieces about this program that are really exciting is that it's really open to a broad variety of prospective educators. You've got high school students who, through some of our career and technical organizations at the high school level, we do have a teaching as a profession pathway. And so we are able to engage high school students in kind of leading into this apprenticeship program. We also can work with students who are pursuing their bachelor's degree. We can support or engage and support education support professionals who are interested in the profession. And finally, there's a fourth audience, folks who may not have been educators in the past, but who are interested in coming back and getting that certification. So this is a program that allows them to get to their certification in 3 years rather than 4. So they're getting there faster. They're getting high quality job embedded training. They're getting compensated for that training. And they're graduating without debt. So those are some pretty significant supports as we are looking to strengthen that pipeline into the profession.
And just to clarify, the compensation for the apprentices in this program are coming somewhat from the Department of Labor apprenticeship funding, but are primarily right now coming from the COVID recovery funding that Tennessee received. Is that correct?
That is correct. Tennessee right now is using a portion of our ESSER dollars to support this program. We are getting some funding from the U.S. Department of Labor. And and I didn't mention this, but one of the other critical pieces about taking this through the U.S. Department of Labor, and I'm going to check my notes because I don't want to misspeak on this, it allows us to access
Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act.
And the local workforce labor boards. So it provides another avenue of funding. So as we start thinking about the sustainability of it, that's going to allow us to access a different pot of money that we've not thought about before.
Thank you. Do you feel like this conversation around the approval of the apprenticeship program, the idea of compensating student teachers in that particular program, does that open up the conversation more broadly to compensating student teachers in Tennessee? Have you seen any shift in perspective there?
I don't think we've seen that shift yet because we're so early in the apprenticeship program concept. There are a couple of things I would point out. One, I think we have to start that conversation. One of the things that's not lost on me, because I, like Brittany, had to, a long time ago when I was student teaching, had to stop working, and I was privileged enough to be able to move home with my parents, both of whom were educators, and live at home with no expenses in order to complete my student teaching. But that is where we start this concept that educators owe it to society to work for free. It is one of the things that leads to people not wanting to stay in the profession. In addition to being undercompensated, there's this societal expectation that we should work for free, and it begins with the unpaid student teaching part of it. So I think it has to be part of the conversation if we're going to be serious about removing barriers to the profession. We've got to talk about compensation and the larger narrative around the expectations of public school educators and this expectation that we work for free. That has to end. So for that reason, it has to be part of the conversation.
And just one last question. So just curious if anyone opposed the development of the apprenticeship program in Tennessee, and if you see that same kind of opposition potentially rising for any efforts to shift to compensating all student teachers?
That's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity to put this into the space. You know, we need this very good dose of reality in that, first of all, so we did not see any groups that were in strong opposition. I did not hear of any as we were working with the department. But after the announcement was made in January about this program, I know that my office was getting lit up. The Department of Education was getting lit up with a lot of vitriol from current practitioners who were feeling like, I'm struggling, I am drowning in student debt. And then we're going to create this program for folks coming in where they're not going to have any debt. They felt very abandoned. And so I think as we move forward in this conversation, it's really critical that it's not an either or proposition, that it's a both and, that we recognize that we have to build the pipeline, we have to remove the barriers to entering the profession. At the same time, we are working to unload student debt from the shoulders of our current practitioners and improve their working conditions and compensation.
Thank you so much, Beth. And Jennifer, I'd love to turn to you now. So Beth talked about Tennessee's efforts in Clarksville being focused on trying to grow your own, or she used the term, I think, GYO, which is sort of shorthand for this concept of growing your own teachers. So bringing members from the community who often look and are from the same cultures and backgrounds as the students in those schools. And I know a lot of your work has been focused on this issue of trying to, again, sort of make sure that students have teachers that like understand them, that know them, that represent them. And so would love to just jump in a little bit more to your efforts to offer a residency program that is trying to recruit and serve these types of teachers.
Sure. You know, and I just want to sort of underscore something that Beth said, which I think has been sort of left out of the conversation a lot. And so I appreciate you bringing up the idea of why we think, you know, student teaching should be a free service, right, to the community. And I sort of noted Ricardo's comment, culture of sacrifice, patriarchy at work. And I just want to just underscore that, that comment, because I think it's a real one. It's also something that we also know from the research on the history of the profession itself being very feminized, not to, you know, not to detract from any of the wonderful brothers who are here on this call and a part of this conversation. But I do believe that that is a part of why sometimes we are just not getting the kind of respect as professionals that we should. So getting back to your question though, Melissa, about residencies, and if you think about it, residencies were developed sort of styled after a medical residency model where individuals would apprentice with a highly experienced professional alongside that person and get some compensation, but also be trained and prepared within a sort of a teaching school sort of environment where it's sort of a combination of a professional development school as well as the traditional model or alternate route model even. But residencies do provide a required living stipend for their candidates, and we here have had a residency since 2009, and we've generally had 50 to 75% of our candidates, our cohorts, are Black, Indigenous, people of color. And this year, our cohort is totally people of color. We make sure that we advertise and recruit in spaces where people of color frequent, houses of worship, working with school districts to engage their current employees, sororities, fraternities, social groups, and getting the word out that way. And I think because the Teacher Quality Partnership Grant Program, the federal program, requires a 100% match, our school district partners help to pay for part of that stipend. And so in that way, our district partners, our schools, have sort of skin in the game, and they know that they're investing in the teachers who are going to come into their district to teach. And as Brittany even pointed out, for a minimum of 3 years, but we have graduates who have been there since 2009, and in fact, they are providing some of the professional development to our newest cohort members, and that's sort of keeping a community together. Our alums are together, they're supporting each other in that way. And so I think those are some of the strengths of a residency model that does provide some compensation for the fine work that our teacher candidates are doing. But I will note this, one of the things that we are noting over time, and again, these times are even tougher, all of what I just described helps. They're getting a stipend, a living stipend. The district knows about them. They have a guaranteed job when they finish their preparation, but some candidates still have family obligations and they cannot live at home for free like some of us did, and in years past. Every person in the household has to pull their own weight, and there are other costs. So for example, they do still have to pay tuition. The grant programs don't allow free tuition, and so that still has to be paid for. Tests for certification, for example, in our state we require 2 praxis exams, one to get into the program, one to exit the program, as well as the TPA. Transportation to and from their schools also is another area, and certainly for those who are second career or older and have a family, childcare costs. You've got, somebody's got to be there to take care of the children. So while yes, I think a residency is a great model, it's one that we have supported, and it has definitely increased the diversity of the candidates that we've been able to bring in. It still is not sort of the be all and end all. And there have to be other ways that we are able to help our candidates pay for their education and be in school at the same time.
Thank you, Jennifer. And the teacher quality partnership grants that you spoke about are a federal grant, but it's a competitive grant, right? This is not available to any program that even would want to offer a residency. You have to be selected by the U.S. Department of Education. So I just wanted to clarify that piece, correct?
Yeah, and I'll say that, I talk about the first generation, second generation of residencies. First generation being even before the federal funding was available, were all privately funded. And some of those, many of those are still in existence today. But again, it takes above and beyond any other kind of compensation. There are foundations that are supporting residencies to this day, or many residencies are cobbling together private money and public money in order to support them, as well as district money. And I'll put a plug in for Prepared to Teach. That is a wonderful organization out of Bank Street College that is actually helping districts and particularly educator preparation programs partner together, and communities to support residencies, and certainly working and intervening in the states, and hopefully having an effect on public policy around the existence and sustainability of residencies.
Thank you. And I have one last question for you, which is about, you mentioned the teacher quality partnership grants. You're actually not allowed to provide tuition reimbursement or to cover tuition costs for students. Is that correct?
This particular round, it's interesting, in years past, and I think the department, I will say, the Department of Ed has tried to refine the model, and they have tried to come up with a formula that is a workable formula. In years past, the educator preparation programs, the universities could offer fee waivers or tuition waivers to go along with the stipend. So you get a living stipend, but you are also getting a discount, for example, on your tuition. that is no longer allowed. So now we have to pay a stipend that's large enough so that individuals can not only, live, but also pay for their education as well, or tap into existing state or local funding sources that will compensate or they'll make up for the difference in terms of tuition. So I think that more and more, and I appreciate all the work that the TQP program has provided and guidance in terms of helping us to work together to try and find ways to help our candidates pay for their education.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I hope we can dig in more to that when we have more of a group chat in just a minute. But I want to turn to Jim and understand more about where Washington is headed with providing different approaches and supports to pre-service educators, including clearly compensation. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So, Washington, like other states, has really looked at the modalities of preparation and has broadened the various ways that individuals can achieve certification. So our standards board has increased access to entities like community colleges, nonprofits, service districts, which is a kind of a subsidiary of our State Department, to step in and be teacher preparation providers and certification entities. And I think with that, it's really open. These new organizations step in with their unique assets and their organizational structures and their resources to really create new types of support for our next generation of educators. And I think that's really exciting. It's out of adversity comes like new ideas we hadn't thought about. I referenced earlier, kind of our tendency sometimes in policy is to look at the singular issue and tackle that issue with solutions. And that often happens in state houses and, maybe is a bit endemic to the education profession, which is we like to jump in and solve issues or problems. And it really, again, we need to be thinking about issues and problems within the context of the full educator career continuum. And that is before someone even starts. It's pre-service, it's like the grow your owns, it's the connections into the profession. And I think there's a really good opportunity to think about this particular issue in that context. And I think there are some questions that we need to be thinking about in the context of compensation for pre-service teachers. So, some ones that come to my mind are, what is the relationship between preparation, hiring, onboarding, early career mentoring and induction, retention, and then career-long joy, which is, something I think anyone in education aspires to have after the last couple of years. But it's, it's the key to retention and ultimately creating supportive learning environments for students. Other couple questions I think are really important to unpack is, what are the school systems like that our early career educators are getting hired into? We can do amazing work in the creation of educator preparation programs, including doing new approaches to recruiting and supporting BIPOC educators. But are all educators then after programs stepping into inclusive environments and given what they need to thrive? And I think we have a lot of work to do as a system in a career continuum to be thinking about the connection between that bridge between pre-service and that first job and your early career. And that may entail some changes that need to happen within our school structures. But I think in that logic of a larger conversation, it's really, it's a logical conversation to have. I want to just wrap up this point with something really exciting going on in Washington. And it's something pretty exciting that's happening within the union. So I really believe there is an important role for unions in shaping the future of the professions. That's why I do the work I do every day. It's why I stay working in the NEA family. I want to share a recent policy change that happened at our representative assembly within WA in April. Delegates from around our state approved a constitution and bylaws change that creates a 10-year, $12 per member dues assessment. It creates a scholarship fund for BIPOC individuals to pursue careers in public education. So this new scholarship is estimated to bring in about $1 million per year for the next 10 years to really, really support this next generation of educators of color in our system. And I think that's really exciting.
Thank you so much, Jim. And just wanted to also get your thoughts on, you talked a little bit about the, push to just implement something, and that sometimes there, maybe pieces that need to get moved along with it, and that perhaps there may be some unintended consequences. Are there concerns that you have about things that could shift in ways we wouldn't want them to by compensating student teachers?
I think Beth alluded to a bit of this in her remarks, but I think one of the challenges of isolating a single policy intervention with one segment of educators, in this case pre-service educators, is, this is a change to past practice. And, I wonder, will more veteran educators resent that early career educators, received a Bennett when they had to, do their time, is kind of the common vernacular used for that period of time, of that instability of, additional expenses, paying for student teaching. So I think there's a significant work to really unpack the complexities of that. I thought Beth's remarks were really interesting in sort of like the Tennessee context. For me, it's kind of an open question. I wonder how our current educators would respond to this idea after that Omicron reality we've all just been through. My hunch is that educators maybe now, after January and February and March, may be open to like really intentional conversations about how we build a better pipeline of educators. Most people I've talked to, most teachers I've talked to have covered someone else's classroom, sometimes like every day a week, or have stepped in informally to support an emergency substitute just to get by on a daily basis or on a weekly basis to just survive. And so there's been a collateral relationship of understaffing on our veteran teachers. They're exhausted for a lot of reasons. Unstable staffing is another part of that equation. So I wonder, kind of openly in that context, might educators now be more open to investments that are unique to this new generation of educators, in the name of more stable staffing going forward? Brittany, you could have made a comment before that worried me, is like, I think we could tend to look at like that Omicron period as, wow, that was really bad. It's got to get better. It's possible like that could be, we could be in episodes of repeat staffing issues like that. So I think we are in a crisis in staffing of educators in this country right now. And I think there may need to be some tough conversations on that. In terms of, I guess, intended consequences, we need to think about that as well. Is, what might the results look like of this? Might we be able to support and retain educators, specifically, future BIPOC educators, more by doing this, by, them not coming out of college saddled with a debt, which I think is so unique to our younger generations, where they just, they're decades away from being able to purchase their own home with the debt that they're saddled with. In terms of unintended consequences, we've got to think about those too. I do wonder about the potential adverse impact on tuition-dependent teacher preparation programs. I mean, that's a model for many programs. Tuition is how they keep their doors open. So that says to me, and we've really got to be thinking about funding incentives at a state level that can keep those tuition-dependent models whole, so to speak, and without undue disruption, still allowing them to innovate and to operate, but take the adverse impact off the candidate.
Thank you, Jim. I'd love to open it up to Beth and Jennifer and Brittany to either respond to the initial question about intended, unintended consequences, or to jump into some of the questions that Jim has posed here that have got you thinking
Yeah, I would love to jump in. You know, as Jim was talking about, we're seeking stable staffing, and how important that has been, particularly during the pandemic when educators have had to give up planning time and take on additional students to cover where we had gaps. And so I know the stress and the frustration and the feelings of being overwhelmed that our educators were feeling. I do wonder how we can think about that as we contemplate compensating those who are doing student teaching or doing these apprenticeships. Is there a way that we can provide some sort of compensation for the educators who are going to be serving as mentors, because they're going to be taking on increased responsibilities as well, and whether it's compensating them with money or with time and what that might look like. I think that should be part of the conversation too, if we're going to be able to sustain this, because I think one of the worst things we could do is create a system that is going to, from day one, create a sense of resentment and division between our folks entering the profession and those who are veterans who, yeah, Melissa, and money and time, and those who will be mentoring those early career educators.
Jennifer, Brittany, anything you want to add to the conversation?
I think what Beth is saying is true. And one of the things that we've tried to do, and we have done with our residency, not only is the district helping to pay for those living stipends, but they're also helping to pay the stipends for the mentors, the teachers who are working with them. And that is actually above and beyond what the university pays to the mentors, because we do believe and we want to support the fact that they are professionals and that this is a professional task, and that certainly mentoring new teachers is not something that comes, people don't even really necessarily get any training for that. They just happen to be able to do it and do it well. But we provide professional development for our mentors on top of what they're doing, as well as compensation. And we are trying to influence the profession, influence certainly our partners, our school partners, in elevating, right, the status of our mentor teachers as well. And so we do so by bringing them together for professional development and encouraging them as leaders themselves within the profession. Not that they would necessarily go into administration, but that they as leaders will continue to lead and also offer themselves in many different ways, but we compensate them, as Beth was saying. We make sure that that we value what they bring to the table, and encourage each other. In terms of the issue of even the times that we're living in, and particularly the stresses on our teachers, one of the things that we've been doing in one of our partnership districts, that it's really just sort of the beginning, but our program, we actually have an induction program to support first, second, and third year teachers when they leave us from our program. It's only the ones who, unfortunately, in the grant program that require it, but we're hoping to expand, and we certainly are working with some of our district partners. And this one particular district has decided to invest. And again, a lot of times, some of the things that we are talking about is reallocating existing dollars that will continue to come in, so that they're addressing the real vulnerable areas. So we've been providing professional development. Again, they're graduates of our program. They're also employees of the district. And so the district is beginning to identify and see the talent that's right there in their midst, that they should be encouraging and lifting up and understanding and knowing is there. And we've seen the folks in the district said they've seen a spike in the number of teachers who are coming for the professional development. It's meaningful to them. It's feeding them. It's helping them. It's supporting them as they go through this time period. So I think there are a lot of things that educator preparation programs can do in partnership with our school district partners, so that, and certainly our professional associations, that will help advance the profession.
I would just add on to that and say, as you know, as a student teacher working with mentor teachers, I was really lucky to have wonderful mentor teachers. But when I sat down and I talked to them about, you know, and it's hard to ask, hey, what are you getting in return for having me in your classroom? It's not a lot. And I often say the amount of time you have to put in to teach me and to do all of that background work for my courses, like my coursework, I have to have signed off. A lot of the projects I have to do are with my mentor teacher, requiring more time, requiring more effort on their part. It's not even just observations. It's the amount of work that comes from the classes you take as well when you're student teaching. And I often say, was it worth it? And that's not like, you know, to me, but it, you know, when you only have so much time and you're a young mom or a young parent, it's really hard to give up more of that time. And so I couldn't agree more with the compensation to our mentor teachers. And if we're going to ask them to take on student teachers and, you know, for student teachers to be compensated for the professionals they are as well, mentor teachers should be receiving that as well. So it's a really great point to touch on.
Melissa, can I offer a thought as a follow-up to Brittany there? Because I'm a rural educator, if you can't tell by my accent, I lived and taught in rural Tennessee, very rural Tennessee, in one of the most distressed counties in the state. And as I'm thinking about that compensation piece, not only for folks going through the apprenticeship program, but also potentially for mentors, I do think we have to explore the equity issue and thinking about how districts are resourced. I mean, even if the USDOL is going to fund 50%, that leaves quite a bit that may fall down to the local school district. And if you are already struggling to fund your schools, this is not going to be something that even if you wanted to do, that you can actually afford to do. And so I think about you know, our most under-resourced districts, whether they're rural or not, there's a real equity piece there that I think that we have to deliberately contemplate how to address.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that was one of my next questions. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just wanted to add one other perspective. I think when you're thinking about legislators, they're always looking at, you know, funding from an investment standpoint. What are we going to get for this investment? And again, that's back to my point. I do believe like a state investment in something like this would be really important for equity and access. We actually have one case of a financial investment in Washington State that I wanted to share a bit about, because I think it may, you know, inform like policy conversations around student teaching investment. So we're a strong national board state. We have about 12,000 national board certified teachers. 2006, our legislature, and this is after our National Board Certified Teachers organized, put in a base $5,000 bonus for being board certified and working in a public school. That's annual. And then a second bonus of $5,000 annually if they worked in high poverty schools, as defined by free and reduced lunch. So in 2006, about 9% of our board certified teachers worked in high poverty schools. As of 2021, it's almost 32%. So pretty big policy cause and effect. And so my point there is, yeah, money does talk. And what we know of research that's been done on this population is that, yeah, there's a retention effect as well. So I do think there is importance of, you know, in terms of the advocacy side around this with legislators, that, you know, it's really important to have good data and to look at longitudinal impact. My hunch is I think there would be a return on that investment.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think that's one piece I just did want to quickly touch on before we move to the audience Q&A section is the issue of quality. And, you know, certainly one intended consequence, I believe, of compensating student teachers is to get them to choose a higher quality preparation pathway. One way that states have really tried to address teacher shortages and vacancies has been essentially to just make it easier to become a teacher, oftentimes removing requirements for licensure or certification where teachers can come into the classroom or individuals can come into the classroom and teach without having any formal pre-service preparation. And so I do think that sort of thinking from a policymaker's standpoint, thinking about the impact on both quality and retention and diversity, there are sort of three aspects that I think policymakers and hopefully all stakeholders involved in education care about. And it's, you know, not just quantity, but it's also quality and it's also diversity. And that piece you made, that point you made, Jim, about retention, I think is really important. Our research on post-baccalaureate teacher residencies does indicate that there's a much higher retention rate. There is much higher, including retention rate of BIPOC educators. And so I think being able to focus on some of those points, but also trying to have more research on the pre-baccalaureate teacher residencies and understanding those better, because I don't think there is that same depth of research in that area because we haven't experimented with that quite as deeply. But does anybody have any other thoughts they want to add about sort of the quality piece, or what to think about in terms of making a case to policymakers that this is a smart decision?
I would just add that, you know, and like in my university, it's a full year of student teaching, and there are a lot of other programs are only a semester, a half a year. And when I go and interview and I talk to administrators, they're looking for somebody who has more experience, who comes from a teacher preparation program with a lot of experience. When I leave my student teaching, I basically almost have an entire year of teaching under my belt, and administrators look for that because I have a higher quality of education and you know, preparation, but that should not come with a higher price tag, right? We cannot do that to our students in our schools. And so that piece that you hit on, Melissa, you know, when we're talking about, you know, higher quality teachers, that should not come with a higher price tag, right? It should not cost us more, because it really does discriminate against the BIPOC community and people who can participate in these programs. So it's really difficult, but you're right. Some type of compensation would be very beneficial. It'd make the playing field a lot easier, a lot more leveled, and yeah.
Great, thank you all so much. Please, everyone, join me in thanking our panelists. You all now have an opportunity to get some of your questions answered. So thank you to NEA for curating all of those for me. And I'm gonna put some out sometimes to specific people, but generally anyone who wants to can jump in. So there's been a few questions about places that folks can look for resources on teacher candidate compensation. I personally don't know a specific place that all of these exist, but what are some places that, for example, in Tennessee or in Washington or other places that you all have looked to as examples for how you would want to model a student teacher compensation system? Are there specific ones that have stood out to you that you've wanted to use as a guide, or are there other pieces of research, perhaps, Jennifer, that you want to bring to bear on you know, best practices for these types of efforts?
You know, I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at our institution. And one of the things that we found is that one size does not fit all, and there is no magic bullet. There is not one system, not one, you know, particular way of making sure that we support our students as they are going through their program. So I'm going to just share a number of different ways. In fact, within our Center of Pedagogy, we actually have a unit called Advisement and Retention. So I think we have to become very creative in our efforts to recruit and provide opportunities to retain our students who have chosen teaching as a profession. One way that we haven't talked about today is actually the National Teach Grant program, which does exist through the federal government. And it's the only federal student aid grant program that directly benefits teachers working in high need fields and underserved schools. That's urban and rural, where we see the need greatest. It allows a teacher candidate who has a minimum GPA of, say, a 3.25, who's willing to teach in a high need cert area in a high need school. And that's an effort to recruit our so-called best and brightest students to serve. They may not do that for their entire life's career, but I think we are in a generation that doesn't necessarily stay in the same career for 40, 50 years as we've seen in the past, but it is a way of thinking about service. And the Teach Grant provides up to $4,000 a year for students. Now, it is a grant that can convert or revert to a loan if they don't stay teaching in a high need environment for a minimum of 4 years, but it is an incentive. That's one thing. And I will say that many of our residency students actually do take on Teach Grants because they're eligible for it, and many students do stay in it. But we also do some things locally, and I think here again, it's the thinking of the individual, say the university that's helping partnering with our school districts. And we have several districts. New Jersey's got a lot of school districts. So we've got 34 school districts that we're partnering with, local LEAs. So we've got multiple strategies that we use. We actually have a dual enrollment program with one of our school districts that is really developing. You may have heard about it, Red Hawks Rising. And it's a way of enrolling our high school students, particularly students of color, to have college credits, to get college credits in their junior and senior year. And the district pays for it with Perkins funding, and they've also paid for it with some of the ARP money as well. They can get up to 30 credits of college credits, and that's accelerating them towards higher ed. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to definitely go into teaching, because we aren't social engineers, but it is getting them a jump start into higher ed, and it's working. And it seems to be something that's exciting students about the prospect of becoming a teacher. Working with our students and filling out their FAFSA forms. A lot of FAFSA money, a lot of the student aid money goes untapped because we haven't been aggressive about that, and making aggressive packages that are offered to students who are studying to become teachers, right? Intentionally hiring students, particularly students of color, into departments that can both mentor and pay them while they're going through school, so that they're saving some of those dollars that they would normally have to spend. We actually have, to diversify our teacher ed program, we have a Future Teachers of Color group that recruits students right from high school into our program before they even accepted into our program, so that we're helping them, getting vouchers from ETS for test taking so that they don't have to spend as much money. Engaging our faculty and staff to aggressively and intentionally reach out to our students, particularly students of color, and invite them in, and recommending them for department and program scholarships and awards. We just gave over $65,000 in awards to students who are going into student teaching. And then that's coming from our alumni association. So that means working very closely with the development office, right? To make sure that our development officers are actually working hard to tap in and understand the needs of our students as they're going through our program. And then certainly working with our school districts and our professional associations to provide incentives, just like the ones that Jim talked about earlier. So those are the things that I think that we can do creatively to think about recruiting and retaining students in the program, so that they don't just start the program, but they finish.
Just wanted to give everyone else a chance if they wanted to jump in. So just Also curious, one of the questions is about whether candidates could receive a stipend from their educator preparation program that is funded in part by their tuition and fees for during the student teaching semester. Jennifer, you talked earlier about how there are certain rules around some grants where you can do that, or maybe you could from other funds. But the sort of related question to that is what college services might be impacted if that was the case, if students were getting a stipend from the educator preparation program within a university, for example. I think trying to get a better sense of what services, and I think you just talked to some of them, like in terms of providing some academic support, some financial supports, coordinating some of those things, but are there things that would be impacted in terms of the university's ability to provide certain services to student teachers if some of those tuition and fees were reserved to provide stipends to student teachers?
I don't know of any institutions that are actually doing that, but it's an interesting model. I know that here we actually have a new administration that's very, very focused on a service. We're literally naming ourselves a public service institution, and there is a much greater, I will say, commitment to meeting the needs of the community, of the surrounding communities. And so we're looking at our budget and our budget process and our budget model, and how, again, a lot of this is reallocating existing funds. It's not about finding external funds or finding new funds, but really thinking about where are we investing our funds to meet the greatest need, not only for our communities, but also for our students. And so I think that that's certainly a relevant and important topic to think about. It's just one that I have not heard of another higher ed institution thinking about engaging in that way and in investing in students in that way. But I would say that, again, some of the creative things we are doing, I think, is educating our alums and educating those who are in the profession, who are wanting to give back, educating those who our development office is tapping into. We have, some of our donors actually come to our awards program and they meet the students that they are investing in. And we just had, a couple who just said, not only was it important for us to invest in these particular young people as they're going through their program, but we also want to invest in their induction. And so we did a whole presentation on the value of the induction program. And they said, we want to give to this and we want to tell others as well. Having an advisory board for your college of education that understands the needs of students who are going through programs and giving in that way as well.
Great, thank you. So there was a question that touched on the same idea of differentiating quality in teacher preparation, that right now someone could essentially go and teach tomorrow without having gone through any type of intensive student teaching experience and start gaining a salary. And so that clearly is a large disincentive to then go the higher quality route of trying to, spend 3 to 4 up to a year's worth of 12 months worth of time going through a student teaching experience. So any thoughts on shifting this dynamic that has been in place? So clearly one idea is to compensate student teachers. Are there other ideas that you all have that could help shift this current movement? We certainly see in terms of the diversity of teachers coming in through different routes, that these faster track routes into the profession are appealing to BIPOC candidates because they are faster, cheaper. You are making a salary right away, particularly if you are, for example, like a non-traditional candidate, you have a family, you have childcare, you have a lot of expenses. So how can other than paying student teachers, are there other thoughts you all have for how we can address some of those things?
Melissa, I don't know if it's I apologize, Jim, if I cut you off.
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if it's a solution, but one of the things I think about, at least for Tennessee, is we have a pretty stringent accountability measure or accountability system for educators in the state. And, you know, one of the things that I think about is that old mantra of go slow to go fast. You know, and if we're rushing through our educator preparation to get to compensation faster, and we're missing out on that quality, the impact, one, not only on our students, but also on educators' own evaluation scores. And in Tennessee, hate it or not, student test scores are a huge component of an educator's evaluation score. And so helping folks understand that it may be great in the short end, but in the long end, your ability to remain in the profession, to keep your job, and to eventually earn tenure status is going to be negatively impacted if you rush that process. So it's not necessarily a fix, but it's certainly a mindset that I think we can talk about.
So, I mentioned in Washington, we have over 14,000 emergency subs out in schools right now. And that's a pretty big number given our kind of small teaching workforce compared to some other states. And what we know about those individuals, we know about 25% of them have bachelor's degrees. Our hunches, we think there may be some existing student teachers in there who are emergency subbing on the side, during free periods during their day. We know there's probably a fair amount of education support professionals who are in those schools, perhaps as an instructional paraeducator, maybe other roles, who've been tapped during their emergency subs. We also know there's people who are probably off the street, like they were. We've seen some schools where there's signs like we usually see for bus drivers, for teachers, come to the main office if you're interested in teaching, and the district would issue an emergency sub request. So, we need to know more about these populations. And, there's an opportunity in these 14,000 who have shades of preparation, ranging from, some to none, to connect them in to become certificated. One thing that's really important to know is, as a sub, it's an unstable position to be in. In Washington, you can sub for up to 180 days consecutively, but there's no guarantees, there's no job security. Ultimately, being fully certified is the most stable place to be, and eventually be under 3-year provisional status in our state. So I think we need to be thinking about these individuals who've found their ways into our classroom, and gosh, I hope they've had a great experience amidst everything going on. It's probably been really challenging, but we probably in the mix of our states have some really talented people who just need those connections. They need help with those connections to get certified. And that's where residencies, I think, have great possibility. I also, to Jennifer's points, really well taken about in-depth, deep relationships in communities, churches, communities, color organizations. We can't just be in this mindset of waiting for people to show up to us and our systems. We need to actively build those relationships if we don't have them. And I can think of no one better to do that than our existing educators who have those relationships already. So that's like a human resource opportunity we have, is how do we exist? How do we access our existing workforce to be the change we want to see with a changed pipeline? They know those former students who should be teachers. Like, how do we support them to make that connection and get them connected with the right program that's going to get them into our classrooms as a fully certificated educator?
Yeah, that's a great point to end on. And I will just say that I know that there have been efforts to try to, in the absence of, what would ideally be maybe a federally supported residency stipend, the same way that we have for medical students, the organizations like Prepared to Teach at the Bank Street School of Education, they've put together some resources for districts to be able to figure out within their budgets how to sustainably pay for residents by using them for certain things, like as a paraprofessional or as a substitute teacher, but then they also, so they're getting some funding through some of those resources at the same time that they're doing some of their student teaching. So there's some interesting, models out there, people trying to figure out different ways to make this something that is sustainable, in the absence of some sort of larger federal effort. But hopefully, Brittany, your efforts to write letters, to have NEA write letters to Secretary Cardona, and efforts happening in the States will have the impact that you all hope that they will. And I think that we are out of time here. I'm going to pass it back to Andrea to wrap us up. Thank you so much to our panelists.
And thank you, Melissa, for guiding us through this conversation. It feels like this hour and a half went by really, really quickly. And I have like 15 more questions I want to ask, but you always want to leave with people wanting more. So let me just thank Beth from Tennessee and really leading us in this work and starting this conversation around apprenticeships, and Jim, who is a longtime colleague that we depend on, really great stuff coming from Washington through the affiliate. Jennifer, it's the first time I've met you. Want to have more conversation with you. And Brittany, who we have just been so lucky to see as a leader, growing as an inspiring educator and moving into the profession. And I think, Brittany, knowing that you and your colleagues are coming and leading gives us all great hope for a profession that we all loved and have worked in for a really long time. So good luck on the job search. Like I said, Jim and Beth could probably find you one. I bet Jennifer can find you one in New Jersey as well. So feel free to reach out. So I want to thank, just a point of personal privilege, my staff in the teacher quality department, my colleagues, Rochelle Patterson, who led this third in our series. They really are amazing people. I'm really lucky to work with them. So as I said, this is part 3 of a 4-part policy series around teacher quality issues. And I want you to please look in your email for our 4th and our final roundtable, which will be on diversifying the teaching profession in the next couple of months. So thanks all. Have a great afternoon, and we're close enough to the weekend to say have a great weekend. And I will talk with you all soon. Thanks a lot.